Greetings, my fellow knights and damsels of the lady. Take a seat near my fireplace, grab a bottle of fine wine from Bordeaux as I recount the tale of Sir Landuin, the finest knight of Bretonnia whom hailed from the once fair land of Mousillon. Landuin was the first Duke of Mousillon and the second of the superhuman Grail companions of Gilles le Breton, who fought in the 12 great battles that freed and unified Bretonnia. He was the best of the companions, who were themselves among the mightiest beings to have walked the world. He is often regarded as the greatest, most skillful and noble knight to have ever lived. Landuin was the lord of the Bretonnie of Castle Mousillon and the surrounding lands by 975 by the imperial calendar, when the lord of Baston died and his son, Gilles le Breton, joined forces with Thierulf of Lyonesse to repel the greenskin armies attacking the territories. Upon learning this, the young lord of Mousillon rode forth from the river Grismere to give his life alongside Gilles in battle. Tall and fair, quiet of word and decisive of deed, as swift as the coming of night, level-headed and gentle of demeanor, Landuin was renowned as the greatest knight in existence. His skill with blade and lance were beyond compare, and his bravery, horsemanship and chivalry were above all others. None could stand before his wrath. He alone was worthy to bear the heraldic device of fleur-de-lis, an ancient symbol of purity and devotion. Soon after their first victory, Gilles and his friends were visited by the Lady of the Lake, who blessed them and turned them into the first Grail Knights. The lady knew well of Landuin's fairness of mind and body, and she blessed him with such grace that no blade could find its mark upon him, nor could the ill-minded find fault with which to curse him. Landuin became the epitome of knighthood, the paragon that all knights aspire towards, and he was beloved by all. None could stand before him in battle, and Mousillon gained much honor thanks to his mighty deeds. The companions spent the following 2 years campaigning throughout the lands of Bretonnia, joining forces with the other 11 lords of the realm and fighting a series of clashes with greenskins, undead, skaven and beastmen that became known as the 12 great battles. They were victorious in each and earned much honor, glory and renown. The deeds of the companions became the epitome of aspiration for all knights, and these battles formed the basis of countless Bretonnian tales in later years. In the first battle, Landuin fought against orc hordes besieging Bordeaux. He wrought as much slaughter as his entire army of Mousillon, helping drive the greenskins into the ocean. In the second battle, Landuin struck down the bloated orc warboss that was invading Brienne, while Fredemund of Aquitaine slew his monstrous wyvern, winning the day for the Bretonnie. After the 8th battle, the companions turned west, towards the fairest land of Mousillon. Unfortunately, the realm of Landuin's family had been ravaged in his absence. His land had been turned to smoldering ruin, cattle lay slaughtered and blackened the wasteland, and the once pure river was dark with foulness. A bilious stench carried up from swamplands, where before virgin glades stood proud. The companions rode in grim silence through the gates of Mousillon, for to join with the remnants of Landuin's family and Fulgar, the neighboring lord of Artois. Together they defended Castle Mousillon against a great undead host marching under full moon. Beset by beasts and living dead, the companions fought one to each wall, there to hold out alone against the foe. For an entire day, Landuin was lost among the host, which pressed all around him like a sea of undeath. The companions finally find triumph when Landuin struck down the foul vampire that has called the dead forth from their peace. He returned, covered in gore and bearing the head of the vile creature. The remaining beast then fled howling into the darkness of the forest. After the securing of all the lands of the Bretonnie tribes, a great meeting took place in the home of Fulgar of Artois. Here the former dukedoms were created and the Bretonnian calendar was introduced. Thus, year 979 of the imperial calendar is considered year 1 of the Bretonnian one. Each of the great lords of the Bretonnie, the 14 Grail companions, including Gilles le Breton, were named dukes. The dukes swore oath of allegiance and Bretonnia was formed. Landuin had never again experienced joy after seeing Mousillon so tormented. Even with the unification of Bretonnia and the crowning of Gilles, he could not feel triumph in his heart as did the other companions. He rode back to Mousillon and rebuilt his home, but the dukedom was forever touched by his sorrow. At one point, Landuin slew a particularly mighty dragon, adding to his long and impressive saga. In 1003, according to the imperial calendar, Landuin and Thirulf, always competitive, had a major falling out, with some believing that the cause was over Thirulf's wife, Rosalind of Bastan. A challenge was fought between them, with Landuin coming out victorious, inflicting a wound across Thirulf's face. After this event, Landuin became a recluse, and very few people would see him again. Landuin was found dead in his bed in 1045, according to the imperial calendar. An old man, dying of a broken heart for his dead kin and the sickness upon his homeland. After his death, glorious Mousillon slowly fell further into darkness, eventually becoming little more than a dark wasteland. I have played Bretonnia since the release of Warhammer 5th edition in the mid-90s. They have always been my favorite army out there, and I was deeply saddened when Games Workshop decided to blow up the old world and all the armies contained within. I have dipped my toes into Age of Sigmar and have almost painted up an entire Fireslayer army, but I am yet to have a game with that system. With the release of Warhammer the Old World, I don't know if I ever will. Bretonnian players were the hardcore gamers of the Warhammer world. Well, at least they had the most patience, seeing that the last Bretonnian army book was released during the 6th edition of the game. No new book was released during either 7th or 8th edition of Warhammer Fantasy Battles. We held our hopes high, but alas, the world exploded before we saw anything new for Bretonnia. When I played Bretonnia during the Fantasy Battle days, I based my army around Fair Bastan. My general was the noble Duke Bohemond of Bastan, and my army was clad in yellow with red dragon symbols all over. Those were the days.
Those were the days.
When the Old World was announced, and Bretonnia was confirmed as a supported faction this time around, I immediately began pondering which province my army should hail from. Bastan is now the home of the King of Bretonnia, Luin Orcslayer, but I've already done Bastan in the past. No, it was time for something new. Then I considered Mousillon. I was used to the idea that Mousillon was a place filled with the undead. So my first idea was that my men-at-arms should have zombie heads, and I could use blood dragons as Grail Knights, a vampire for a duke, and etc, etc. Then I rejected the idea because I wanted a proper Bretonnian force. An army of noble knights, clad in all the colors the world has to offer, except green, but more on that later in this video.
More on that later.
So my second idea was an army hailing from all across Bretonnia. A multitude of colors, banners, heraldry and background. Bretonnia as Bretonnia was intended, if you ask me. But alas, I rejected that idea as well. Why? Because something important dawned upon me. This is the Old World, not the End Times. Warhammer the Old World is set roughly 300 years prior to the events of Warhammer Fantasy Battles. What does that mean for Bretonnia? Well, besides the king being from Bastan instead of Couronne, it means that the dukedom of Mousillon is yet to fall from grace. In Warhammer the Old World, Mousillon is still, for all intent and purposes, a fair and noble land, led by Duke Mordred, whom later in life will betray Bretonnia and ignite a civil war. But for now, all is good and swell in the dukedom of Mousillon. Besides, my favorite color is blue, so a blue army with white fleur-de-lis is just up my sleeve. Hence, that is what my choice has fallen upon. Fair Mousillon, while it is still fair and noble. Now, how will I paint the army, I hear you ask? Well, in blue, of course. Duh! However, everything who isn't a noble knight will be painted in a grimdark style, filled with dirt, rust and misery. I for one enjoy the Bretonnian background, where the knights are the heroes of our stories and the peasants are the downtrodden, forgotten background noise. I look forward to providing you guys with painting videos for my Mousillon project. Please subscribe if you are at all interested in following my Mousillon project, and maybe be inspired by some painting tutorials. A quick note on color theory and Bretonnian lore. Bretonnian knights are only ever clad in either black, white or any of the primary colors. According to the background, you will never see purple or orange heraldry on a knight. And most certainly not the color green. Shame on you, Creative Assembly. However, most Bretonnian players ignore this, and they should. It is their hobby after all. I had originally decided to follow the law when it came to choosing a color scheme for my army, but after settling for a Mousillon host, I'll stick to blue for my army heraldry. The general of my army will be the courageous Duke Maldred of Mousillon. My knights will be shiny, my damsels fair, and my peasants downright dirty and disgusting. A proper Bretonnian army, if you will. These were some of the thoughts behind choosing my army for Warhammer the Old World. I would love to hear about how you choose which force to play in the Old World and your reasons why. Now, on a final note in this chapter, I sometimes get asked, why play a human faction in a fantasy world? Isn't that boring?
Boring, isn't it?
Well, no, it is not boring. I don't know how it's like to be an orc, dwarf, elf or beastman. I do know how it is to be human, with all the flaws that come along with it. I can imagine how it must be for a man-at-arms to stand face to face with a minotaur, ready to rip your face off. I have difficulty imagining the reverse situation, so that is why I choose to play a human faction. I know what it is like to be human. Oh, then why not play the Empire, I hear you ask? Well, those guys are cowards hiding behind cannons. Give me a brave knight issuing challenges left and right any day of the week over an imperial sausage eater who consider using gunpowder proper fighting. Vive le roi, vive Bretonnia.
Is le roi in French and means the king.
I think that's called Retcon.
Bretonnia has undergone several changes to its background throughout history. Back in 3rd edition of Warhammer Fantasy Battles, Bretonnia was an evil place where everyone was corrupt. Cannons and crossbows were a common sight within the armies of Bretonnia, and they were essentially the bad guys of the human factions in Warhammer. Then 5th edition appeared, and Bretonnia was now all in on being the good guys. Knights in shining armor, fair damsels and a happy peasantry was the way of the day back then. Questing knights were using lances, like any other type of knight. Very little differentiated the different classes of knights, and the lance formation was a triangle in a game of squares. But then the world bid welcome to Warhammer Fantasy Battles 6th edition. This time around Bretonnia had become a mix of past versions. The knights were still noble and shining, but the peasantry was downtrodden and sometimes outright murdered for touching a nobleman's horse or daring to glance at a beautiful damsel passing by. The lance formation was no longer a proper wedge formation, and questing knights had swapped their lances for great weapons, and the knight-errants had thrown away their helmets so people could recognize their feats of valor on the battlefield. Pegasus Knights and the trebuchet was introduced in this edition. In the army book it was described that the trebuchet was a recent invention in Bretonnia. The author of the 6th edition Bretonnia army book also wrote a few novels about a knight of Bretonnia. Inside these novels we learned that the Grail Knights apparently bring Superman himself to shame, and the color green is a poor man's color and therefore never seen displayed on a knight's heraldry, just to name a couple of lore tidbits. Now I hear some of you ask, what's about the Green Knight? Well, Timmy, the Green Knight is not a regular knight. He is connected with the Fae, and Knights of Bretonnia, brave as they are, will not wear the color green. It is for peasants and the Fae folk. Now, Warhammer the Old World has been released upon us, but what have changed in fair Bretonnia this time around? Here is a list of some of the things I've discovered. The trebuchet is still around. This means that it is not a recent invention, as was mentioned in 6th edition. The color green is acceptable for a Bretonnian knight. The front cover of the novel Lords of the Lands show a knight clad in green heraldry. Female knights. Again, the cover of the Lords of the Lands novel show a female knight riding a Pegasus. Besides, the Knights of the Realm on foot kit includes female knights. Bretonnia seems to be the good guys again. I might be mistaken about this one, but so far I haven't seen any mention of any downtrodden peasants. This smells more like 5th edition Bretonnia than 6th edition. Knights now fight on foot. This one makes a lot of sense though. How would a Knight of Bretonnia otherwise defend a castle during a siege? The Bombard is back. It has been missing since 3rd edition. Is there anything I have forgotten? Then please leave a comment. I regard this video as part 0 in my series of videos following my Project Mousillon army. If you've seen this far, then I would like to thank you. Thank you for watching, listening and just for being here. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. If you find this subject interesting, then please subscribe and hit the bell to get notified about my future release of videos. Happy gaming!